So we got us another one of these Jubilee videos, Surrounded. And this is a doctor. And the good doctor, he's surrounded by a bunch of people who watched YouTube videos to do their research about vaccines. They saw a Facebook meme. Okay? There's so many good exchanges, but this one starts right at the beginning, fresh out of the gate. Listen to this. I have a story of my own. It's very similar afterwards.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Doing fantastic. Excited to talk about health.
I just had a baby, 7 months old. And, my baby, I was like, no, I'm not getting any vaccines. The doctors came in, they made me feel like a very bad mother for not doing that, right? I was very pressured. And then I had a family friend who had a baby at the same time, was a few months in, gave vaccines to the baby, and the baby had seizures and has had seizures since. And I've also had a friend who I went on a mission trip with, and this pastor was totally healthy, two young girls, and this pastor literally got a heart attack out of nowhere, and the only thing was he took the vaccine, and there's many cases like that.
So when we see two things happen simultaneously in healthcare, sometimes we think they have caused one another. But unless we see a pattern of that happening over and over again on a large scale,
right,
it's more likely that this is just a coincidence of things happening at the same time. For example, I have a friend of mine who's a physician who vaccinates children very regularly. And they were about to give a child the vaccine. And before giving the vaccine, the child had a seizure. They went on and had more seizures throughout their life and ended up actually dying at a very young age because of a seizure disorder. But the vaccine was never given. Had that happened 2 minutes later, what do you think would have been in the mother's mind and in the father's mind in that situation? Other than, I definitely think that vaccine caused that problem. But it could have just as easily happened before, which it did, and the vaccine wasn't responsible. So it's very difficult when two things happen at the same time to be able to make an exact reason as to if that's what happened to cause it.
So it was around 8 years ago. I had this project out in a hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. And the project was, we installed, I don't know, maybe a few 100,000 of these light fixtures, and they were cool, man. They would dim, you could program them, the whole thing. They did daylight harvesting. They were smart fixtures. They were cool. And in one particular hospital, there were these two can lights, and they were right above an elevator in the main lobby of the place. And picture like the main lobby is probably 30-foot tall glass to the outside. It's just windows, and the fixtures in that area, it was so bright from the natural light from outside, the fixtures in that area harvested daylight. They were barely ever on during the day. But there was these two can lights. They were 6-inch cans right above the elevator door. And they didn't have power on them. And I remember a guy replacing them with the can lights that we put in the very first day of the job. And, there was no power on them. He just replaced them quick. And I didn't know the story behind those fixtures. I thought maybe they were on switches or something. Not typical in a hallway, but people do dumb shit. So he replaces these fixtures, and I hear it from 4 of their maintenance staff at this hospital that those fixtures always work. Okay? Always. One of them was very belligerent about it. And in fact, he told me he had just changed the lamps in those can lights a couple weeks before we got there. But now that we've been there, they no longer work. I had about 4 of these jobs going on at the time, right in the same area. Literally did not care about those two can lights. They weren't even, I don't even know why they were there. Just the structure, the way it was built, they weren't necessary. So when that job was finally wrapping up, I remember I was walking by there, and there just so happened to be a ladder nearby. So I thought I would try to get to the bottom of why these light fixtures didn't work. And I opened the ceiling there, and I shine my flashlight. I could see the top of one of the can lights, and there's a MC cable whip goes to the next can light. Okay, so that's looks fine. And then coming out of the second can light, there's an MC cable whip, and I follow it with my flashlight. And as I turn and look, I noticed that about 6 feet away, maybe, it's wrapped in a coil, and there's a piece of duct tape around it, and it was never hooked up. Those can lights that always worked before we got there, they were never hooked up during the construction of that job. They never worked, ever. But they always worked before we got there. So I called the guy, who was the most belligerent about it. And I asked him to come over to where I'm at. And my story was, I followed the whip and I see the box it lands in, and there's a circuit number written on the box cover. But I can't see it. The old peepers, you know, they just ain't what they used to be. And so he climbs up the ladder to look, and he does the same thing I did. He looks at the first can light, he sees the whip, he's following it with his flashlight. And then he follows the whip out of the second fixture, only I had moved it so that it was right at the top where the opening was in the ceiling tile. And he looks down and it's right there. And this man picks this up. And then he looks at the first can light, and then he looks at the second can light, and then he follows the whip around, and he's holding it in his hand. And he does this. I watch him. I just stand there with a big shit-eating grin on my face, watching him do this. He does this 6, 8, 10 times. It felt like forever. And finally, I say to him, "Hey, Chuck, I don't care how many times you look at what you're looking at today. You could stand there and do it for the rest of the day. But it's never going to make that whip land in that box and make itself up in there so those lights could possibly have ever worked." Everybody's got stories like this. That's one of mine. I've got scores of them, okay? Now, this is just a story about a couple of insignificant light fixtures near an elevator in fucking Arizona. This isn't near as important as what the good doctor's trying to tell you here. Cause and effect doesn't always add up, okay? We showed up there to work on some lights, and some lights didn't work after we showed up. They also didn't work before. Also, when your 70-year-old person, you know, has a heart attack, it's kind of what happens to people when they're 70. And people have seizures sometimes, and the world's an imperfect place. Vaccinate yourself and vaccinate your kids. Don't be a fucking idiot. Don't do YouTube research, okay? I know you all think you researched this. You researched it. You didn't research anything. You wouldn't even fucking know how to research anything. You'd have not the first fucking idea of how to go about doing it. No clue. None.